Imagine waking up to find that everything you've ever worked for, your savings, your salary, your security, has turned to dust overnight. Yesterday you could buy a home. Today your paycheck can't buy a loaf of bread. Cash isn't counted. It's carried in wheelbarrows. The price of coffee doubles before you finish drinking it. This isn't a nightmare. It's history. It's history. And it's happened again and again and again. We like to believe money is stable, that a number in your bank account means something real. But the story of hyperinflation shows how fragile that illusion is. In the next few minutes, you'll see how 5 nations, Germany, Hungary, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, and Yugoslavia, watched their money die, and how each collapse began with the same delusion, that printing more paper could solve real-world problems. Germany, 1923. The Weimar Republic is bleeding from World War I. The Treaty of Versailles demands 132 billion gold marks, a debt no economy on earth could pay. Factories are broken, men are gone, morale is shattered. So the government does what desperate governments do. It prints money. At first it seems clever. More currency means bills get paid, wages rise, and debts shrink in real terms. But then the spiral begins. Prices double, then triple, then explode. By November 1923, a loaf of bread costs 200 billion marks. Children make kites out of banknotes. Families burn paper money for heat because firewood costs more. The deeper tragedy wasn't just economic, it was psychological. People stopped believing that money had value. Once that faith disappears, the entire social contract collapses. Out of that chaos, resentment grew. Resentment that extremists could exploit. A decade later, Germany's despair helped open the door to Adolf Hitler. Hyperinflation didn't just destroy savings, it destroyed democracy. Fast forward 80 years to Zimbabwe, early 2000s. Once called Africa's breadbasket, it was rich in farmland, minerals, and potential. But political power can turn prosperity into dust. President Robert Mugabe's government, facing pressure and sanctions, seized commercial farms and handed them to political loyalists. Food production collapsed, revenue collapsed, so the government turned to the printing press, the oldest trick in the dictator's book. By 2008, inflation hit 79.6 billion%. Prices doubled every 24 hours. Banks stopped counting zeros. The Reserve Bank printed $100 trillion notes that could barely buy a bus ticket. People began to mock the currency until they realized there was nothing to laugh about. Pensions vanished. Salaries meant nothing. Supermarkets emptied out. Zimbabweans turned to foreign cash. The US dollar, the South African rand, anything that still held meaning. The lesson: you can destroy confidence faster than you can print money. And when trust dies, currency becomes confetti. Now we travel back to post-war Europe. Hungary, 1946. A country devastated by occupation, looting, and loss. The government, desperate to rebuild, printed money like air, flooding the economy with pengo notes to pay debts and fund reconstruction. But inflation didn't just rise. It exploded. Prices doubled every 15 hours. That's not a metaphor. That's math. By summer 1946, Hungary's monthly inflation reached 41.9 quadrillion%, the worst ever recorded. The government kept inventing new currencies to try to keep up. There was the mil pengo, worth 1 million pengo. Then the B pengo, worth 1 billion. And then nothing. When the pengo finally collapsed, Hungary introduced a new currency, the forint. But the damage was already done. The middle class was wiped out, savings erased, and faith in government gone. It wasn't just money that vanished. It was memory. Generations of wealth erased by a printing press. Next stop, Venezuela, a nation with the world's largest proven oil reserves, now synonymous with economic ruin. Yugoslavia, 1993. For decades, oil wealth funded social programs, subsidies, and political loyalty. But when oil prices fell, corruption and mismanagement were exposed. Instead of reforming, the government printed money to cover the shortfall, fueling the very inflation it was trying to hide. By 2018, inflation had crossed 1,000%. A worker could earn their paycheck in the morning and find it worthless by night. Shelves were bare. Hospitals ran out of medicine. Professionals, doctors, engineers, teachers, fled to neighboring countries just to survive. In a desperate move, the government chopped 6 zeros off the currency, then another 5. But no matter how many zeros you erase, you can't print back trust. Venezuela's collapse wasn't caused by war or foreign invasion, but by economic arrogance, a belief that ideology could bend mathematics. It never can. The country is disintegrating in ethnic conflict and economic isolation. Factories close, borders crumble. The government's answer? Print more dinars. By that winter, inflation reached 313 million% per month. Prices doubled every 36 hours. Salaries were paid twice a day, before they lost value. Ordinary people survived by trading in foreign currencies, cigarettes, or barter. The dinar, once a symbol of unity, became worthless. Some used the bills as notepaper or wallpaper. The government tried over and over to reset the system with new currencies. Each one failed faster than the last. Hyperinflation didn't just end Yugoslavia's economy, it ended its identity. When money dies, nations unravel. You might think this is ancient history, that it could never happen in a modern economy. But history whispers otherwise. Today, global debt has surpassed $300 trillion. The United States alone owes more than $34 trillion. Central banks have printed trillions to keep markets afloat, from the 2008 crisis to the pandemic stimulus. And for a while it worked. Growth continued, stocks soared, inflation stayed tame, until 2021. Suddenly, prices rose across the board, supply chains broke, energy costs spiked, groceries, rent, and essentials all climbed faster than wages. For many, it felt like the early tremors of something larger. We're not in hyperinflation yet, but the mindset is what matters. The belief that debt can rise forever, that money printing has no limits, that inflation is just a temporary glitch. That's exactly what every doomed government once believed. So what can we learn from these 5 financial infernos? First, real wealth isn't numbers, it's value. Land, skills, tools, relationships, and knowledge endure when paper does not. Second, trust is the true currency. Once people lose faith in their money, the economy becomes chaos. Third, inflation punishes the unprepared. It moves quietly, then suddenly. The poor suffer first, but in the end, everyone pays. Protecting yourself doesn't mean fear, it means awareness. Reduce debt. Diversify. Learn skills that matter in any system. Build a life that costs less to maintain. Because inflation is the silent tax, invisible, constant, and merciless. It's how systems decay without a single bullet fired. The worst hyperinflations in history were never accidents. They were choices, born of denial, greed, and arrogance. And when someone says, "That could never happen here," remember, every country that said that thought the same thing. Money is not magic, it's a promise, and promises only hold as long as trust does. The story of hyperinflation isn't about currency, it's about human nature, about what happens when we choose comfort over discipline, illusion over reality. Because in the end, empires don't fall when enemies attack. They fall when the math stops working, and nobody wants to admit it. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History doesn't just repeat, it rhymes. And understanding it might be the best investment you'll ever make.